This is Marla. Welcome back for another CottageCutz YouTube video tutorial. Today I'm bringing you my final Christmas card on the CottageCutz YouTube channel featuring the Christmas release for 2022. Here's a look at the inspiration, the colors, the poinsettia. I just wanted to share that with you. And then I did create part of my card off camera. This happens to be the elephant that I've included on my card today. I colored him and put him together. I'm using the elephant with the Christmas tree. As you can see, there's the head, the body, and then there's layering pieces for the hands and the toenails. And then I'll be using the Poinsettia Floral. This die is a very large die. You certainly could cut the largest layer of the poinsettia, the medium layer, and the small layer several times and have a small, medium, and large poinsettia. For my card today, I went ahead and layered all three of those up to create the beautiful plant. And then I'm going to be using these flat magicals. This is from Lindy's Stamp Gang. I have a piece of Canson XL watercolor paper, and I'm going to be using these magicals to create the background for both my flowers and for my leaves. I'm starting with a color called Foxglove Fuchsia. The set that I'm using is called Mountain Meadows. So I spritzed my watercolor cardstock with some water, and then I am using a dry paintbrush to sprinkle some of that Foxglove Fuchsia onto the panel. I will also add a little bit of this Wild Rose Rouge, and then I'm going to spritz it with a little bit more water to get it moving, get those colors mixing together, and it's going to create a beautiful color combination for my poinsettias. You could go with one color, but I did like to have that transition of color on the poinsettia. I do use my paintbrush to move some of the more concentrated areas, so sometimes you can add the water and you'll have a little bit of the powder concentrated. Just use a wet paintbrush and you can move that around, as you can see. In order to layer the color, it's really important for you to dry in between applications. So my panel is dry here, and then I'm going to use what's left on my desk, and I'm going to go ahead and tap that cardstock into that magical solution. I'll spritz it with a little bit of water, and then again I'm going to use my heat tool to dry. I'm adding the Foxglove Fuchsia, and I'm going to do a little bit of splattering. This is a step you could actually skip because you really don't see it once I cut out the flowers and add some stamping that I'm going to do in just a moment. But I didn't want to waste what was left on my desk, so there were some white spaces on that cardstock, and I went ahead and just dipped it into those areas and added it to those white edges. I'm going to do the same thing with this Wild Rose Rouge. And then again, I'm going to just dip it in because that Foxglove Fuchsia really was taking off, and I wanted a little bit more of that red tint. I've dried my cardstock. There's a little bit of bend in it, so I'm going to use my hands just to slightly reshape it. And then here I have a stamp from my stash. This is a distressed polka dot, and I'm going to use some peppermint ink from Catherine Pooler. I'm not quite sure. I think it's peppermint scrub. This has a little bit of a reddish tint to it, and I'm just going to stamp it around that panel, let it dry, and then I will use the Poinsettia Floral to cut out the flowers. So here I'm just aligning it, making sure that all of the flowers are covered by that watercolor cardstock, and I'm using my scissors to trim it down. So I needed to trim it down to make sure that it was going to fit in my die cut machine. I want to place this at an angle to make sure that I don't get warping on my die, and to make sure that it cuts nicely. That there's on the left, there's a little bit that's overhanging. So what I'm doing here is just moving it back a little bit to make sure that I'm able to get that fully cut out. And you'll see here in just a moment that it cut beautifully. Now, watercolor cardstock is a little bit thicker, so that's why I passed it through a couple of times, just making sure that it cut through the cardstock, because thinner cardstock obviously is not going to be an issue, but because this is on the thicker side, it was important to me to make sure that I got it right the first time. All right, I'm using the same system. So I have Canson XL watercolor paper. I'm starting with Mountain Meadow Green. Again, this is part of the Flat Magicals Mountain Meadows collection. I added some water to the panel, and then to the one on the right, I'm going to add Evergreen Emerald. And this is going to be right here, you're going to see. It's a very deep emerald color with a hint of blue. So there's an undertone of blue in that. Again, I used my paintbrush just to make sure that I got that spread out evenly. I'll use my heat tool to dry it, set it aside, and then I'm going to take the lighter one that I did not add the evergreen emerald to, and I'm going to lightly tap it because I want this to be a lighter color. So for the first one that I did, I'm going to cut one area of the foliage out using that, and then for this one I'm going to cut the holly pieces, and I wanted this to be a different color. I'm using the same colors, but I'm using it in different strengths. So it's a lot lighter on the first one. I'm not going to let any of this go to waste, so I do have another piece of Canson XL watercolor paper, and all I'm doing is I am going to tap this up. So I do dry in between the applications, and I am going to tap it back in off camera, I believe, and I'll have that to use on another project. So don't let those magicals go to waste. Use it up on a scrap piece of paper. So here's where we're going to die cut the leaf elements out. So for the lighter pieces I mentioned, I'm going to cut the holly out, and I'm going to cut out, there's a long, I don't know what you call it. It's a long branch that is part of this die set, and I'm going to cut that out of the darker cardstock. All right, so I'm going to set my holly aside. You can see it right there. Here's where I'm going to go ahead and cut that second piece. Now, when I did cut it, I ended up getting three of the leaves from the smallest of the poinsettias, and I ended up keeping that. You're going to see I'm going to set that to the side. I'm going to end up using that as leaves for my poinsettia. It's not really what it was intended to do, but right there you can see that set. I didn't want it to go to waste, and so I went ahead and used it. Now, I did cut out the berry branch, and I used the die to cut out the berries for the branch, and I used that same cardstock that I had colored for my poinsettias. There are larger berries and then there are smaller berries. I used one large berry for the center, and then the rest of them were on the smaller side. You could do whatever you like. If you want all large berries, you could cut out all large berries. If you want a mixture, an even mixture of both, you certainly can do that. And you can see when I cut out those poinsettias, look at how beautiful they look. We have nice depth of color, and we also have that pattern from the distressed dots that I used. And I think that that just added a lot of texture and interest to my poinsettias. I did use the 3 berries. I added them to the center of my poinsettia. You certainly could color them a different color, but I stayed with them being pink because I did want to just remain within that inspiration piece that I shared with you. When I am looking for inspiration, I always go either to Pinterest or I go to challenges, and so there's several different groups that I can pull from to see what their challenges are. And this happened to be Scrapbook and Cards Today, I believe, and it had that beautiful illustration for a jumping point, and that's what inspired me to create this card today. I wanted to add some gloss to those berries, so I went ahead and used the Morning Dew from Nuvo, which is equivalent to Glossy Accents. And also I forgot to mention that on the poinsettia, on the center of it, I did use Crystal Stickles to give it a little bit of shimmer and shine with that glitter glue. All right, so we are going to do some more die cutting. I have this scrap piece of paper, and this is a die from my stash. And this is where I'm actually going to put my elephant. So that is going to be the center of my card. I do have an A2 size top folding card. It's 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. And I am going to die cut the layering pieces, or I'm going to cut down the layering pieces off camera. So I did cut the first layer down to 4 by 5 1/4, and then the second layer is going to be cut to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. Now disregard the splattering on the right hand side, because I did end up changing and decided that I wanted it to be a solid white, so I did cut another one of those die cuts for my card. I'm going to center this onto my card panel, and then the paper that I use that's green, that is from Paper Tray Ink, and that is their Bitty Big paper. And it comes in 4 different, the same color, but 4 different styles. So I'm going to start with the thinner stripe. I'm adding some double-sided tape to that. And that will go on top of that magenta colored cardstock. And then I'm going to add another piece across the middle of it. So you can see that piece, it's cut to 2 inches by 5 1/2 inches. I'll use that double-sided tape, and then I have that smaller polka dot pattern. Off camera, I did take one of the, when I cut down that magenta cardstock, there were little strips. So I did end up adding one to the center of this because I thought that it added a little more interest. And then for the white piece that I'm going to add, that decorative piece, I did add foam tape to the center of that before I adhered it to my panel. I'm going to offset these flowers using foam tape in between each of the layers. I did want to mention that I am giving away this Poinsettia Floral die in my next video. In order to qualify, all you need to do is leave a comment, like the video, and make sure you're a subscriber. Here's a look at the completed card. As you can see, I added the poinsettia to the bottom portion of the card panel. I added the berries over top, and then the leaf branch that I cut out using the darker combination of the greens. I added the holly to the upper right hand corner, and then I colored my elephant, as I mentioned off screen, and he is the center of that white die cut. I want to apologize because my memory card filled up and my camera doesn't make any noise when it stops filming, and so I was putting the card together and it did film off camera, but it was really easy to put together, and I hope that you enjoyed this card. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I want to wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas, and until next time, I hope you have a fabulous day.